Ketharan had served the Galactic Coalition for 40 cycles. In all that time, they had watched many species fight wars. They had seen the Dren move like machines, perfect and cold. They had watched the Kaelori strike fast and disappear like ghosts. They had observed the Thexians crush their enemies with raw strength and fury. None of them had ever surprised Ketharan. War was war. Violence was violence. Every species approached it differently, but in the end, it was all the same. Ketharan was a combat analyst for the Veloxi Diplomatic Corps. Their job was simple: watch, record, report. They had done this work for so long that it had become routine. Drop into a conflict zone, observe the soldiers, measure their effectiveness, and write a report for the coalition leadership. It was boring work, but Ketharan was good at it. They noticed things others missed. They could predict how a battle would go just by watching how soldiers prepared for it. When the assignment came to observe Earth's military forces, Ketharan felt nothing special. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. They were considered primitive by coalition standards. Soft bodies, short lives, limited senses. They could not see in the dark like the Veloxi. They could not hear across great distances like the Kaelori. They could not survive in vacuum like the Dren. By every measure that mattered, humans were unremarkable. The coalition had recently allowed humans to join their military operations. This was standard procedure for new species. Let them fight alongside experienced forces. See what they could do. Decide if they were worth keeping around. Ketharan would be embedded with something called the 142nd Combined Arms Battalion. They would serve aboard a human carrier ship named the Steadfast. Their mission was to observe human soldiers during the frontier campaign against the Hollow Swarm. The Hollow Swarm was a hive mind species that consumed everything in its path. They had appeared from the outer rim 2 decades ago and had been eating their way through the galaxy ever since. Fighting them was brutal, ugly work. Many species had lost entire fleets trying to stop their advance. Before Ketharan departed, they met with senior analyst Vrentosh for a briefing. Vrentosh had observed humans before and seemed amused by the assignment. "You will find them entertaining," Vrentosh said. "They have strange customs. They laugh before battle. They form emotional attachments to their equipment. They give names to their weapons and vehicles. One soldier I observed talked to his rifle like it was a pet." Ketharan recorded this information without reaction. Cultural oddities were common among primitive species. It meant nothing. "They are also surprisingly resilient," Vrentosh continued. "They keep fighting long after tactical logic says they should retreat. Some analysts believe this is because they are too stupid to recognize when they have lost. Others think it is something else. I have not decided." "What do you recommend I focus on?" Ketharan asked. "Their unit cohesion. They form bonds with each other that seem to affect their combat performance. I do not fully understand it, but it appears significant. Pay attention to how they interact when they are not fighting. It may explain how they behave when they are." Ketharan thanked Vrentosh and departed for the Steadfast. The journey took 3 days. When Ketharan arrived, they were not prepared for what they found. The Steadfast was loud, not just the mechanical sounds of a warship, but voices, laughter, music playing from personal devices, soldiers shouting at each other across corridors, not in anger, but in greeting. Ketharan had served on dozens of military vessels. All of them had been quiet, efficient, orderly. This ship felt like a celebration that never ended. A human soldier met Ketharan at the docking bay. He was shorter than most humans Ketharan had seen in briefing materials. Dark hair, brown skin, a smile that never seemed to leave his face. "You must be our coalition observer," the human said. "I'm Sergeant Danny Vega. I'll be your liaison while you're with us. Welcome to the Steadfast." "Thank you, Sergeant Vega. I am Ketharan. I will require access to your command structure, training facilities, and combat operations." Sure. We'll get you set up with everything. But first, you hungry? The mess hall is serving something almost edible today. I do not require human food. Nobody requires it. That's not the point. Danny's smile widened. "Come on, I'll introduce you to the squad." Ketharan followed, already making mental notes. The human seemed inefficient. Too much talking, too much smiling, too much energy spent on things that did not matter. The mess hall was crowded and noisy. Soldiers sat in groups, eating and talking. Some were playing games with cards. Others were watching video recordings on portable screens. A few were sleeping in corners, apparently unconcerned about the chaos around them. Danny led Ketharan to a table where several soldiers sat. He introduced them one by one. Colonel Grace Holloway was the commanding officer of the battalion. She had gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that suggested many years of difficult decisions. She spoke calmly and deliberately, and the other soldiers clearly respected her. Lieutenant Carmen Reyes led the platoon Ketharan would be observing most closely. She was intense and focused, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it changed her entire face. Private First Class Amy Liu was the youngest soldier at the table. She handled communications for the squad. She was quiet compared to the others, but Ketharan noticed that she watched everything with careful attention. Corporal Jake Brennan was the largest human Ketharan had ever seen. He handled heavy weapons for the squad. Despite his size, he spoke softly and seemed gentle when he was not discussing combat. "So you're here to watch us fight," Lieutenant Reyes said. It was not a question. "I am here to observe and assess human combat effectiveness for coalition integration protocols," Ketharan replied. "Same thing." Reyes shrugged. "Just stay out of the way when things get hot. We'll try not to embarrass ourselves." "I do not expect embarrassment. I expect standard combat performance within predicted parameters." The soldiers exchanged looks that Ketharan could not interpret. Danny laughed. "Standard combat performance," he repeated. "I like that. Very official." Ketharan did not understand what was funny. They made a note to research human humor later. Over the following days, Ketharan observed the soldiers closely. They watched training exercises and equipment maintenance. They attended briefings and strategy sessions. They recorded everything with careful precision. But the more they watched, the more confused they became. These humans did not behave like soldiers preparing for war. They behaved like a family preparing for a reunion. They argued about trivial things. They shared food. They told stories about their homes and their loved ones. They touched each other constantly, hands on shoulders, arms around backs, casual contact that served no tactical purpose. "Why do you check your equipment 3 times?" Ketharan asked Danny one day. "Coalition protocol requires only 1 inspection." Danny thought about it. "Once for me. Once for the soldier next to me. Once for the people waiting for me back home." Ketharan recorded this as redundancy protocol with emotional basis and continued observing. They did not yet understand what they were seeing. They would learn. 2 weeks passed aboard the Steadfast. Ketharan filled their data files with observations, but none of it made sense. The humans refused to fit into any category they had created over 40 cycles of analysis. Every morning, the soldiers gathered for something called physical training. They ran in circles. They lifted heavy objects and put them down again. They did repetitive movements that seemed to serve no purpose except to make them tired and sweaty. Other species trained for specific combat skills. Humans trained just to train. Why do you exhaust yourselves before the day has even started? Keth Aaron asked Danny during one of these sessions. Danny was breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face. He grinned anyway. Keeps us sharp. Keeps us together. Suffering builds bonds. That is illogical. Suffering should be avoided, not sought. Maybe for you. For us, it's different. When you've pushed through pain with someone, you trust them. You know they won't quit when things get bad. Ketharon recorded this, but did not understand it. The humans had other strange rituals. Before meals, some of them closed their eyes and moved their lips silently. Danny explained this was called prayer. They were talking to a god they could not see or hear. Does this god respond? Ketharon asked. Not in words, but we feel it. Here. Danny touched his chest. That is your cardiovascular system. It does not process communication. Danny laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. The soldiers also had a custom of gathering in the evenings to share stories. They talked about their homes, their families, their past experiences. Some stories were sad, some were funny, some were clearly exaggerated or entirely fictional. But everyone listened with full attention, as if these stories were important mission briefings. One night, Corporal Brennan told a story about his childhood dog, a large animal named Chester, who had once eaten an entire cake meant for a family celebration. The story was objectively meaningless. It had no tactical value. It taught no useful skills. But when Brennan finished, the other soldiers were laughing and sharing their own stories about pets and family and home. Ketharan noticed that Amy Lou sat slightly apart from the others during these gatherings. She listened and smiled, but she rarely spoke. When the stories turned to family, her smile became smaller and her eyes looked somewhere far away. Later, Ketharan asked Danny about this. Amy's grandmother raised her, Danny said quietly. Only family she's got. She doesn't talk about it much, but I think she worries. Her grandmother is old. Every deployment, Amy wonders if she'll make it back in time. In time for what? To say goodbye, if it comes to that. This was another thing Ketharan did not understand. Why would a soldier carry such a burden into combat? It could only impair their effectiveness. The logical thing would be to separate personal concerns from professional duties. But the humans did not seem to work that way. Lieutenant Reyes was, perhaps, the most confusing of all. She was the most professional soldier in the unit. Her tactical knowledge was excellent. Her decision-making was fast and accurate. In training exercises, she outperformed everyone. But she also had a small photograph that she looked at every night before sleeping. When Ketharan asked about it, she hesitated before answering. My daughter, Sophia, she's 4 years old. Where is she now? With my mother, back on Earth. Reyes touched the photograph gently. She's learning to read. She sends me videos of herself sounding out words. She's terrible at it. She's perfect. Does thinking about her not distract you from your duties? Reyes looked at Keth Aaron with an expression they could not read. She's why I do my duties. She's why I'm good at them. Every decision I make out here is about getting back to her. Every risk I calculate includes her in the equation. That seems like it would make you more cautious, less effective. You'd think so. Reyes almost smiled. But it works the other way. When you have something worth protecting, you fight harder. You think clearer. You don't give up. Keth Aaron added this to their notes. They labeled it motivational attachment theory and flagged it for further study. Colonel Holloway was different from her soldiers, but only in degree. She carried herself with calm authority. She never raised her voice. She never seemed worried, even when discussing dangerous operations. But Ketharan noticed that she knew every soldier in the battalion by name. She knew their families, their concerns, their strengths and weaknesses. She spent hours each week simply talking with them, asking about their lives, listening to their problems. "This seems inefficient," Catharin observed. "A commanding officer should focus on strategic planning, not personal counseling." Holloway raised an eyebrow. "You think knowing my people is a waste of time?" "I think it takes time away from more important matters." "Nothing is more important than knowing your people," Holloway said firmly. "When I send them into battle, I need to know what they can handle, not just physically, emotionally, psychologically. I need to know who will hold the line and who will break. I need to know who to put together and who to keep apart. I can't learn that from training scores and performance reports. I learn it by talking to them, by listening, by caring. Caring is an emotional response. It should not influence command decisions." Holloway looked at Catharin for a long moment. "You've watched a lot of species fight wars. Have you ever fought in one yourself?" "No. Combat analysts observe. We do not participate." "Then maybe that's why you don't understand." Holloway turned back to her work. "War isn't mathematics. It's not about calculating optimal strategies and executing them efficiently. It's about people. Scared, tired, confused people, trying to do impossible things. The only way to lead them is to know them, to care about them, to make them believe that their lives matter to you. And do they? Matter to you? Every single one." Holloway's voice was quiet but certain. "Every single one." Catharin left that conversation more confused than before. Everything they had learned about military leadership suggested that emotional attachment was a weakness. It clouded judgment. It led to poor decisions. It got soldiers killed. But these humans seemed to believe the opposite. They seemed to think that connection made them stronger. The deployment orders came on the 16th day. The Hollow Swarm had attacked a colony world called Verath 4, 12,000 civilians, minimal defenses. The 142nd was the closest response force. Catharin watched the soldiers receive the news. They expected to see fear, hesitation, the normal biological responses to impending danger. Instead, they saw something else. Danny Vega checked his equipment and started telling jokes. Corporal Brennan hummed a song while loading his weapons. Lieutenant Reyes gathered her platoon and reviewed the mission plan with calm precision. Amy Liu tested her communications gear and smiled at something only she could see. Colonel Holloway stood before her battalion and spoke simply. "There are people down there who need our help. We're going to give it to them. Any questions?" No one spoke. "Then, let's move." The soldiers began preparing for drop. Catharin watched them go, still not understanding what they were seeing. These humans were walking toward almost certain death. The tactical projections were clear. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched. But they were smiling. Catharin followed them to the dropships, making notes, recording data, trying to capture something that refused to be quantified. They were about to learn what human courage really looked like. The dropship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Verath 4. Catharin gripped the safety harness and tried to control their biological fear responses. Around them, the soldiers of Bravo Company sat in 2 rows, weapons ready, faces calm. Danny Vega was telling a story. In the middle of a combat drop, with enemy fire lighting up the sky outside, he was telling a story about his sister's wedding. "So the cake arrives, right? 3 tiers. Beautiful. And my uncle, who's had maybe 1 too many drinks, decides he's going to catch the bouquet. Grown man, 6'3", diving across the reception hall." The other soldiers laughed. Some of them had heard this story before. They laughed anyway. "He misses the bouquet. Takes out the cake instead. The whole thing. Face first." More laughter. An explosion rocked the ship. Nobody stopped laughing. Ketharan could not understand. They were about to fight an enemy that had destroyed entire worlds. The probability of survival was less than 30%, and these humans were laughing about a wedding cake. "Are you not afraid?" Ketharan finally asked. The laughter stopped. Danny looked at them with an expression that was hard to read. "Terrified," he said. "But those people down there are more scared than we are. So," he shrugged, "we go anyway." Before Ketharan could respond, the ship lurched hard to the side. Through the small window, they saw another dropship explode in a ball of fire. The swarm had anti-air positions that were not supposed to be there. 2 more ships went down before they reached the landing zone. When they hit the ground, Ketharan's world became chaos. The eastern settlement of Verath 4 was burning. Buildings collapsed, civilians screamed, and everywhere, the clicking horror of swarm drones poured through the streets. They moved like insects, thousands of legs carrying armored bodies with razor-sharp limbs. They killed everything they touched. Lieutenant Reyes was already shouting orders. "First squad, secure that intersection. Second squad, start moving civilians to the evac point. Third squad, with me. We push through to the community center." The soldiers moved without hesitation. They flowed around obstacles and through doorways, like water finding the fastest path. They communicated with short, sharp words and hand signals that Ketharan could barely follow. Danny grabbed Ketharan's arm and pulled them behind a collapsed wall. "Stay close. Don't shoot unless you have to. And if things go bad, run for the evac ships. Don't wait for us. That would be abandonment. I cannot." "You can, and you will. Your job is to survive and report. Our job is everything else." Then Danny was gone, moving with his squad toward the sound of fighting. Ketharan followed. They had a recording device. They had their analytical training. They had no weapon and no combat experience, but they followed anyway. What they saw next would stay with them forever. The humans did not fight like any species Ketharan had observed. They did not form defensive lines and hold positions. They did not calculate optimal engagement distances and maintain them. They did not retreat when the numbers turned against them. They attacked. They pushed forward into impossible odds. They threw themselves at the enemy with a fury that seemed to ignore all tactical logic. Danny Vega entered a burning building and emerged carrying a wounded civilian over his shoulder. A drone came at him from the side. He shot it with one hand while still holding the civilian with the other. His aim should have been impossible from that position. He made it anyway. Corporal Brennan set up his heavy weapon at a street intersection where 5 corridors met. Drones came from all directions. He held that position alone for 11 minutes while evacuation shuttles loaded behind him. 11 minutes against an endless wave of enemies. When his ammunition ran low, he used his weapon as a club. When the weapon broke, he used his hands. Lieutenant Reyes took a piece of shrapnel to her leg during the push to the community center. The wound was serious. She should have fallen back to the medics. Instead, she wrapped it with a field bandage and kept moving. She coordinated her platoon's movements while limping through enemy fire, while treating wounded civilians, while calculating firing solutions in her head. And Amy Lou. Amy Lou was supposed to stay back. Communications specialists were not frontline fighters. They stayed protected. They maintained the link between units. They called for support. But when a group of civilians was trapped in a collapsed building, Amy went in. When the drones followed her, she fought them off with a sidearm and determination. When her squad came to rescue her, they found her standing over the bodies of 9 dead drones, covered in blood that was not all hers. She was smiling. "Told you I could handle myself," she said, before collapsing. The medics saved her. Barely. She had wounds that should have killed her, but she kept breathing, kept fighting, kept refusing to die. The battle lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of constant combat. 6 hours of impossible decisions and impossible actions. 6 hours of humans doing things that should not have been possible. When it was over, the 142nd had lost 31% of their effective strength. 1 in 3 soldiers was dead or wounded. By coalition standards, it was a catastrophic loss. But they had saved 9,847 civilians, 81% of the colony population. That night, Keth Aaron sat in the medical bay and tried to process what they had witnessed. Their recording device was full. Their analytical frameworks were useless. Nothing in their 40 cycles of experience had prepared them for this. Amy Lou was in a bed nearby, sedated and wrapped in bandages. She had been awake for a few minutes earlier, long enough to say one thing to Keth Aaron. "We're too stupid to die," she had whispered. "That's our secret." It was not a secret. It was not stupidity. It was something else, something that Keth Aaron could not name. Danny Vega came to sit beside them. His arm was in a sling and his face was cut and bruised, but he was alive. "Hell of a day," he said quietly. "You should have retreated," Keth Aaron replied. "The tactical situation was untenable. You could have saved more of your soldiers by withdrawing to a defensive position. And the civilians? Some would have been lost. That is an acceptable—" "No." Danny's voice was firm. "No, it's not. Not for us. We don't calculate acceptable losses when it comes to people who can't protect themselves. We go in. We get them out. We pay whatever price we have to pay." "That is not logical." "Maybe not." Danny looked at the sleeping form of Amy Lou. "But it's who we are." Keth Aaron was silent for a long moment. Then they asked the question that had been forming in their mind since the battle began. "How do you do it? How do you walk into certain death and keep fighting? What makes you different?" Danny thought about it. Really thought about it. When he answered, his voice was quiet. "We're not different. We're just connected. Every one of us is fighting for someone else. Amy fights for her grandmother. Brennan fought for his squad. Reyes fights for her daughter. I fight for my family, my friends, the people standing next to me." He paused. "When you're fighting for yourself, it's easy to give up. But when you're fighting for someone you love, you can't stop. You literally can't stop. Your body won't let you." He stood up slowly, wincing at his injuries. "Get some rest. We've got a long journey back to the Steadfast, and I have a feeling this war is just getting started." Keth Aaron watched him go. They looked at their recording device, at the hours of footage and data they had collected. None of it captured what they had really seen today. These humans fought not because they lacked fear. They fought because they had found something stronger than fear. Love. Connection. The need to protect those who could not protect themselves. Keth Aaron had observed 37 species in warfare. None of them had ever made them feel anything. Today, watching these humans sacrifice themselves for strangers, Keth Aaron felt something new. They did not have a name for it yet, but they would learn. The weeks after Verath 4 were the strangest of Keth Aaron's life. They had a report to write. The coalition was waiting for their assessment of human combat effectiveness. Every analyst before them had completed such reports within days of a major engagement. Clear categories, simple conclusions, recommendations for integration or dismissal. Keth Aaron could not write a single word. The problem was that every metric they tried to use felt wrong. Reaction time? Humans were average. Accuracy? Above average but not exceptional. Tactical flexibility? Borrowed mostly from coalition doctrine. Casualties inflicted versus sustained. The mathematics said the humans had performed adequately but not remarkably. But Ketharon had been there. They had seen what the numbers could not capture. They had seen Danny Vega sit with a dying soldier for 2 hours. The soldier's name was Kevin Price. He was 24 years old. He had been hit during the push to the community center, and his wounds were too severe to treat in the field. He was going to die, and everyone knew it. Danny could have been anywhere else. He could have been helping the wounded who might survive. He could have been securing the perimeter. He could have been doing something tactically useful. Instead, he sat with Kevin Price and held his hand. He talked about home. He talked about Kevin's mother, who ran a small restaurant in a city called Austin. He talked about Kevin's girlfriend, who was waiting for him to come back so they could get married. He made Kevin laugh, even as the light faded from his eyes. When Kevin died, Danny closed his eyes and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he stood up, wiped his face, and went back to work. "Why did you stay with him?" Ketharon asked later. "He was going to die regardless. Your presence did not change the outcome." Danny looked at Ketharon like they had asked something very strange. Because he shouldn't have to die alone. Because those last 2 hours mattered to him. Because that's what we do for each other. But it was inefficient. Your time could have been spent. There's nothing more efficient than making sure someone knows they're loved when they die. Danny's voice was hard. Nothing. If you can't understand that, then you can't understand us at all. Ketharon did not respond. They added a note to their file. Priority given to emotional support of dying soldiers. Reason unclear. But the note felt like a lie. They had seen Colonel Holloway carry wounded soldiers to the evacuation ships herself. She was the commanding officer. She had staff for such tasks. But she had done it anyway, ignoring the blood soaking through her uniform, ignoring the exhaustion in her limbs. When one of her officers suggested she rest, she shook her head and kept moving. "They need to see me working," she said. "They need to know I'm not above getting my hands dirty. That I'm one of them. You are not one of them. You are their commander." "I'm both." Holloway lifted another wounded soldier onto a stretcher. "That's what they don't teach you in command school. Leadership isn't about giving orders. It's about being the kind of person your soldiers want to follow, even into death." Ketharon observed the memorial service for the fallen soldiers. It was unlike anything they had seen before. There was music. There were speeches. There were tears and laughter in equal measure. The survivors told stories about the dead. Not about their combat performance, not about their tactical contributions, about their lives, their jokes, their dreams, the small stupid things that made them who they were. Corporal Brennan spoke about Kevin Price's terrible singing voice. Lieutenant Reyes spoke about how he always shared his food, even when rations were short. Amy Lou, still recovering from her wounds, spoke about how he had helped her adjust to military life when she first arrived, how he had made her feel welcome when she felt lost, and at the end, Danny Vega stood and read the names of every soldier they had lost. All of them, one by one. It took almost 15 minutes. When he finished, the entire battalion stood in silence. Later, Ketharon asked Danny about the ritual. "What purpose does it serve? The dead cannot hear you. They cannot benefit from your words." Danny was quiet for a moment. "It's not for them. It's for us. We remember them because they deserve to be remembered. We say their names because names matter. We tell their stories because that's how we keep them alive in a way. In our memories, in who we become because of knowing them. That is sentimental. It serves no tactical purpose. No, it serves a human purpose." Danny met Ketharon's eyes. "We're not machines. We're not numbers. We're people who love each other. And when we lose someone we love, we grieve. That's not weakness. That's what makes us strong. Because we fight for the living and we honor the dead. And that gives our fighting meaning. Keth Aaron began to understand something important. These humans were not fighting despite their emotions. They were fighting because of them. Every soldier carried something with them. Private Liu kept a photograph of her grandmother's garden in her pocket. Corporal Brennan had an image of his dog, Chester. Lieutenant Reyes had a name tattooed on her wrist, Sophia, her daughter. These were not distractions. They were not weaknesses. They were anchors. They were reminders of why the fighting mattered. They were connections to a world worth protecting. And slowly, something began to change in Ketharon. When Amy Liu was cleared for active duty, Ketharon felt relieved. This was an emotional response with no tactical relevance. They should not have cared whether one soldier recovered or not. There were thousands of soldiers in the battalion. One more or less made no statistical difference. But they cared anyway. When Danny told his jokes, Keth Aaron began to understand the rhythm of human humor. They could predict when the other soldiers would laugh. They could almost feel the urge to laugh themselves. Almost. When Colonel Holloway included them in briefings, asking their opinion, valuing their perspective, Keth Aaron felt something warm and unfamiliar in their chest. They had been an observer for 40 cycles. No one had ever asked for their opinion before. They had been invisible, a recording device with legs. These humans saw them as a person. One evening, Danny found Keth Aaron staring at a blank screen. Their report was still unwritten. "Problem?" Danny asked. "I do not know how to describe what I have observed," Keth Aaron admitted. "My analytical frameworks do not accommodate what you humans do. Every category I try to use feels incomplete." Danny sat down beside them. "Then don't use categories. Just tell the truth." "The truth is that you are inefficient, emotional, and frequently illogical. You waste resources on rituals that serve no purpose. You form attachments that compromise your judgment. You take risks that no rational species would take." "Sounds about right." Danny grinned. "What else?" Keth Aaron was quiet for a long moment. Then they said something that surprised them both. "You are also the most extraordinary warriors I have ever seen, and I do not understand why." Danny's grin softened into something warmer. "Maybe that's what you should write. That you don't understand. That we're a puzzle you can't solve. That there's something about humans that doesn't fit into the box. The Coalition will not accept such a report. They want data, categories, conclusions. Then give them what you can, but don't lie about what you can't explain." Danny stood up. "And Keth Aaron? The fact that you care whether you get it right? That's human too." He left Keth Aaron alone with the blank screen. For the first time in 40 cycles, Keth Aaron did not feel like an observer. They felt like they were becoming something else, something that scared them, something that felt like belonging. 3 months after Verath 4, the final battle came. The Hollow Swarm had gathered a massive fleet at Korvax Station. It was a critical waypoint for the entire sector, heavily defended and essential for logistics. If the Swarm took Korvax, they would have a clear path to dozens of populated worlds. The Coalition gathered everything they had. 47 ships, 18,000 soldiers, the largest joint operation since the Swarm first appeared. The Steadfast and its battalion were assigned to the ground assault. Their mission was simple and almost certainly fatal: land on the station, fight through the Swarm defenses, and destroy the central hive node that coordinated the enemy fleet. Without the hive node, the Swarm would become disorganized. The fleet above could win. The odds were calculated at 34% mission success, 67% total casualties. In the hours before deployment, Catherine made a decision that violated every rule they had followed for 40 cycles. They went to Colonel Holloway's office and requested combat assignment. Holloway looked at them for a long time. Her face showed nothing, but her eyes were sharp. "You're an observer," she said. "This isn't your fight." "With respect, Colonel," Catherine replied, "I no longer know how to simply observe. This mission has a 67% casualty rate. You know what that means? 2 out of 3 people who go down there don't come back." "You want to take those odds?" Catherine did not hesitate. "I want to be with them, whatever happens." Something changed in Holloway's expression. Something softened. "Sergeant Vega's squad? If they will have me." Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Good luck, analyst. You've earned your place." Danny welcomed Catherine with his familiar grin. He handed them a spare weapon, a simple energy pistol that even a beginner could operate. "About time you joined us," Danny said. "You've been watching us make fools of ourselves for months. Only fair you get to join in." Amy Lou gave Catherine a quick combat orientation. Basic movements, basic tactics, how to stay alive when everything went wrong. "Don't be a hero," she said. "Stay behind cover, shoot when you have a clear target. And if we tell you to run, you run." "Understood?" Catherine understood. They also understood that they would not run, not anymore. The drop to Korvax Station was the worst Catherine had experienced. The swarm had learned from previous battles. They knew human tactics, human weaknesses. Half of Bravo Company was dead before they even reached the ground. The station was a maze of corridors and chambers, all of them filled with drones. The hive node was deep underground, protected by layer after layer of enemies. Lieutenant Reyes went down at the first defensive line. A drone's blade shattered her leg. She should have fallen back. Instead, she propped herself against a wall, told her squad to keep moving, and stayed behind with a weapon and a detonator. "I'll hold this corridor," she said. "Give you 30 seconds when they try to follow." "Carmen," Danny started. "Go!" Her voice was calm, final. "Tell Sophia I love her." They went. Behind them, they heard the sound of gunfire, then an explosion, then silence. Corporal Brennan carried 2 wounded soldiers for a kilometer of tunnel fighting. He was the strongest person Catherine had ever known, but even strength has limits. At the final checkpoint before the hive node, the drones came in a wave too large to stop. Brennan put down the wounded soldiers and turned to face the enemy. He smiled. "Get them to the node," he told Danny. "I'll hold the door." "Jake." "That's an order, Sergeant." Brennan raised his weapon. "Now move." They moved. The sound of Brennan's last stand echoed behind them for 3 minutes. When it stopped, they knew he was gone. Finally, they reached the hive node chamber. It was massive. A pulsing organic structure the size of a building, its tendrils reaching into walls and floor and ceiling. It was the brain of the entire planetary swarm. Destroy it, and the battle above was won. But the chamber was filled with warriors, hundreds of them. The largest drones Catherine had ever seen, each one capable of tearing a soldier in half. Danny looked at the explosives they had carried, looked at the chamber, looked at his squad. There were 5 of them left, 5 against hundreds. "No way all of us make it through there," he said quietly. "The odds are—" "I know the odds." Amy Lou was already moving, strapping the demolition charges to her armor. "The node has a central cortex. 1 person, small target. I get close enough. I can take it down." "Amy." "No. Tell my grandmother I finally did something interesting." She smiled. That same impossible smile from Verath 4. The same smile Catherine had seen when she stood over 9 dead drones covered in blood. "Besides," I still owe our analyst friend for saving me back on Sector 7. Catharin remembered. They had provided covering fire while Amy crawled to safety during a skirmish 3 weeks ago. It had been nothing, a small thing. But Amy had remembered. And in that moment, Catharin understood something fundamental about humans. Every small kindness mattered. Every connection mattered. These people remembered who had helped them, who had stood beside them, who had cared. And they repaid those debts with their lives if necessary. Together, Catharin heard themselves say, I will go with you. Everyone turned to look at them. Even the drones seemed to pause. You sure? Amy asked. This isn't your war, remember? You're just an observer. And Catharin finally understood what they had been trying to document for the past 3 months. What had refused to fit into any category or framework. What made these humans different from every other species they had studied. It is my war now, Catharin said. You are my people now. Amy's smile widened. Then let's go make some noise. They ran together into the swarm. 2 small figures against an army. 1 human, 1 Veloxi, carrying enough explosives to destroy a city block. Catharin felt the impacts, the pain, the certainty of death closing in from all sides. The drones were everywhere, cutting and tearing, but they also felt something else, fear, real fear. Not the analytical recognition of danger that they had experienced before, the deep, terrible, beautiful fear of losing something that mattered. They had found something worth dying for. Amy was hit. Once, twice, 3 times. She kept moving. Catharin was hit too, their bodies screaming with pain they had never felt before. They kept moving. The central cortex was 10 meters away. 5, 2. Amy looked at Catharin one last time. Her face was pale, blood running from a dozen wounds. But she was smiling. Thank you, she whispered, for understanding us. She triggered the detonator. The explosion was visible from orbit. Catharin woke in a coalition medical facility 6 weeks later. They had been found in the rubble, barely alive, shielded by a collapsed support beam. The doctors said it was a miracle. The doctors did not understand. Amy Liu had not survived. Neither had Danny Vega, who had led the remaining squad members into the chamber to try to extract them when the node fell. Lieutenant Reyes, Corporal Brennan, all of them gone. But the battle was won. The swarm was broken. The sector was saved. Catharin's report was submitted to the Coalition High Command 2 months after their recovery. It was unlike any combat assessment in Veloxi history. It began. I have observed 37 species in warfare. I have documented tactics, strategies, technologies, and cultural approaches to violence across the known galaxy. None of my previous work prepared me for humanity. Standard metrics cannot capture what makes Earth's warriors effective. Their physical capabilities are unremarkable. Their technology is derivative. Their tactics are borrowed, but they possess something that defies quantification, a capacity for connection, for sacrifice, for hope that transforms ordinary soldiers into forces beyond calculation. The humans do not fight because they lack fear. They fight because they have found things they fear losing more than death. I thought I was observing them. I was wrong. They were teaching me. My first taste of fear came while fighting alongside Earth's warriors. It was the most profound gift I have ever received. I recommend immediate full integration of human forces into coalition command structures. Not because they will make us stronger, though they will, but because they will make us better. They taught me what it means to care. And that is worth more than any tactical advantage in the galaxy. The 142nd Combined Arms Battalion was awarded the Coalition's highest honor. A memorial was built on Korvax Station with the names of every soldier who fell. Among them, listed as killed in action, before their unexpected survival, was one Veloxy combat analyst. Keth Aaron returned to active duty the following year, not as an observer. They had requested transfer to the Human Integrated Forces. They had found their people, and they had learned the meaning of fear, not as a weakness to be analyzed, but as the price of love. The humans had taught them that. The humans had taught them everything.